Good evening, and welcome to our Eracism Forum. This is the second forum that we're doing on police reform here in the city of Vallejo. Because of the great response that we got from the first forum, we've decided that education and educating our community on the issues vital to our community are critical. Fortunately, many people are not getting their information from Facebook. Social media is fraught with false information. We have decided that information is power. And in the African American community, we need as much information as possible. Tonight, we are excited to have with us once again our police chief, and tonight, we have added our city manager, both of whom have agreed to come, receive our questions and our challenges around the issues of police reform. Before we start, it's critical that you learn who we are and why we're here. I'd invite you to share this event on your screen, call someone, text someone, tell them where we are. I'm going to pass it to Dr. Danny Jefferson, Superintendent Danny Jefferson, who's going to lead us in prayer.
Let us pray. Father, we pause tonight in remembrance of the great crowd of witnesses, of men and women who have paved the way upon which we stand, many of whom struggled for justice and prayed for the day of equity and fairness in this nation. They fought white supremacy everywhere it reared its ugly head. Father, we thank you for them. They ran their race valiantly, and tonight we stand in that legacy. We have accepted the baton and are continuing the struggle for justice. The prophet instructs, "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint." Father, we thank you that we are no ways tired. Give us strength for the days ahead. These things we ask in your name. Amen. At this time, I would like to introduce the members of Eracism tonight. I believe their pictures will be on the screen momentarily. We will start tonight with the Reverend Dante Quick, who is our lead organizer. We have Dr. Ramona Bishop, Pastor Danny Jefferson, yours truly, Bishop Brian Harris, Mrs. Deborah Dixon, Pastor Rodney Leggett, and Mr. Keith Barnes. We are Eracism. Back into the hands of Pastor Quick.
Who are we and why are we here? Superintendent Jefferson just introduced some of the organizers. We are much larger than those pictures. We are founders of schools that educate Black and brown children, presidents of civic organizations, BAWAPA, the Community Democratic Club. We are pastors representing over 25 churches here in the city of Vallejo. We are community members. We are represented also by 9 Pan-Hellenic organizations, the 9 historically Black fraternities and sororities. We represent a broad swath of the African American community. And we are not new at this. We have been advocating about the issues that have impacted our community and are impacting our community for years. The manifestation of Eracism was a most recent manifestation, not to start a new organization, but to coalesce and bring all of the organizations together under one umbrella. We believe that to move for moral causes, we must operate in moral ways. And therefore, everything we do and everything we say are intended to represent a standard that honors the ancestors. Tonight, we are pleased, and allow me to introduce our city manager, Mr. Nyhoff, and our chief of police, Chief Williams. The two have joined us this evening, and we're going to have a fruitful and at times challenging discussion about law enforcement in our city, public safety, and the direction our city is taking and needs to take in order to inform you as voters and citizens about the facts on the ground. Again, we are not here to tell you when it's time to vote, how to vote. But we do believe, as part of our core mission in Eracism, that information, accurate information, facts, are critical. Let's begin this conversation. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Williams, who has an announcement he'd like to make about a most recent move he has made in the Vallejo Police Department. Chief Williams.
Thank you, Dr. Quick, and thank you for allowing us this opportunity to meet with you. Thank you for this opportunity and for allowing us to be here today. I'd just like to read a press release. Some people may have not seen this, but it's a press release that our PIO put out today on my behalf and the behalf of the city. And it says, on September 30th, 2020, Vallejo Police Chief Shawny Williams issued a notice of termination to Ryan McMahon, former officer with the Vallejo Police Department. The notice of termination was issued after an internal affairs investigation concluded, among other things, that McMahon violated department policies by engaging in unsafe conduct and neglect for basic firearm safety during the incident. The city is unable to comment on any additional allegations because McMahon's privacy rights under California state law pursuant to the Police Officers' Bill of Rights. Pursuant to SB 1421, a redacted version of the notice of discipline will be made available online. My statement is this: any conduct outside the level of professionalism the city deserves will not be tolerated by the Vallejo Police Department. I understand we have a long way to go in rebuilding trust among our residents of Vallejo, and I will continue to take the necessary steps to better serve this community.
Well, let's begin our conversation. It is with, I suspect, deep sadness that you have to make that announcement. One of the things that we want to make clear in Eracism is that we are not anti-police. As African Americans, we cannot afford to be anti-police. Our communities are just demanding just and equitable policing. We want policing that protects and serves our communities. And so it doesn't bring joy when police officers have to be dismissed. But I believe that in the history of our city, this is the first dismissal for misuse of a firearm. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
So the announcement tonight is critical because many of us have been advocating for a very long time that our officers be held to a common high standard, a standard that brings confidence and a sense of honor to our community. And so to start our conversation, I want to begin with you, City Manager Nyhoff. Our first conversations were shortly after you arrived. You met with a group of us, about 7 or 8 of us. We expressed some concerns. It was immediately following a police shooting. I want to commend you first for having that conversation. Your predecessor had been here several years, and many of us had never met him. This is my opinion, not yours, but Mr. Keene was not interested in hearing what the African American community needed or thought. So for you to take that meeting is something I want to commend you on. But it wasn't an easy meeting for you. We pushed. And part of our demand was that we wanted a police force that looked like the community it was policing. At that moment, Chief Badu had tendered his retirement, and you were beginning a search. Tell me, if you can, what has been your learning curve? Between the two of you, you've been here less than 4 years. Between the two of you. And anybody who's managed an institution, let alone a city with a multi-million-dollar budget, isn't gonna get it right away. What has been the most difficult part of the learning curve for you in wrapping your hands around the public safety issues here in the city of Vallejo?
First of all, thank you, Dr. Quick, for the invitation and for the question for that meeting. I remember the two most challenging questions that were approached in our conversation, because they were, you know, we want a department, we want a city that reflects our community when it comes to our diversity. And we also had a conversation about our police department. And I remember hearing and asking you all, saying, well, I hear a lot of people supporting police. And what I gathered from that is, indeed you do, but there were many, many concerns that you had about how the police were conducting business. And so I think I was kind of probing with you all, because I had heard lots of people say, we support police, we support police, we support police. And so I was not able to really see the concerns that certainly have really, since Chief Alio came in the interim, and now since Chief Williams has come on board and we did the OIR assessment, that all of that became, it started unfolding. And so really, for the first year or so, I felt like, you know, things were okay with the police department. They were doing a pretty good job. And so absolutely, with the greatest challenge was starting to then try to break through what I found to be resistance to actually doing assessments and actually finding out what was going on in that department.
So let me stop you for a second. Are you telling me that your first year here, the majority of the people whom you met with had just glowing things to say about the police? That you were getting good feedback. You weren't getting a picture of problems that were going on in our community. Is that your assessment of what you were receiving?
So what I would say is, there were some people coming regularly to council members saying, you know, there's huge issues, officer-involved shootings. But as I would go around and talk to people, and certainly hear from the chief, those were in the minority in numbers, and generally people supported, until really that day you met with me and we had that conversation that, yes, you support police, but you do not support the type of activities that are going on. That was an awakening day. So I wouldn't say glowing, but I would say, yes, I believe that the community absolutely supported police, which is great, but I was not getting the information that I needed to do to really start finding out what was happening inside the department and the different things that were happening on the outside with our community.
So let me be clear. Meeting with the city manager that day was members of BWAPA, members of the NAACP, members of churches, the Black Chamber of Commerce here in Vallejo, and other community members who collectively got together and said, now that we have the process of bringing in a new chief, we need to speak more intensely about what we see as ground level problems. Because yes, we had been working on issues, we've been doing programming, but there was really no breakthrough. And I'm clear that a number of issues we're going to talk about tonight, I've been in conversation with the police for almost 10 years. And we understand that there is a captain who was formerly here that brought up issues. In all of those years that I've been in conversation, none of those issues were ever brought up with me or anybody else in the African community. They were all sort of behind the scenes. And I think it's critical that we understand a culture change had to take place, not just from the police department, but in the city itself and the city management. And one of the critiques that we brought to you was about upper level management in the city. Many of us in Eracism have been here. Deborah Dixon's grown up here all her life. Danny Jefferson's been here all his life. The city had a reputation for a ceiling for where black people could go in city management. I have members here who the first African-American assistant fire chief, Chief Wells, was still known as a groundbreaker in the early 2000s. So how have you been engaged in trying to diversify the city from a management perspective? Tell me about some of the hires that you have made in the last couple of years.
Certainly. So I think, obviously, the best and most qualified person to be the police chief of our city, I'm proud to say, is my brother, Chief Shawny Williams. Hired him. The fire chief, the most qualified individual that was interviewed, was African-American Chief Daryl Arbuthnot. And so really, in my mind, I'm looking for the best candidate first and foremost, but certainly going to look for the diversity within my leadership team. So in addition to that, we have a new IT director. His name's Naveed, and he is of a minority race. We have a new finance director, Reka, who is also from a minority race. Our water department director is African-American. Our public works director is African-American. And then my assistant city manager is Caucasian. We have planning director is Caucasian. We have now what I think is an extremely diverse group of people that now serve our community, which our community is a very diverse community. And, to me, having African-American police chief and African-American fire chief, which I believe both are firsts for Vallejo, was really important. And I was so honored to have these two gentlemen apply for this job and be the most qualified. So I guess I was absolutely blessed that these two gentlemen did that. And they're the highest level positions. Really, those are the two biggest departments in our entire organization. So we've really been able to diversify that. And I can tell you it is the best team that cares about Vallejo, that has worked so hard through this COVID-19, through the financial impacts, to support each other in these challenging times. And they are challenging for everybody in the community, but for us too, to reform, at the same time handle the fiscal issues, COVID-19, ensuring we're doing whatever we can, homelessness, the poverty issues, just all of those issues, trying to do the best we can. So I'm proud of the team and the diversity of the team that we have now.
So I just want to recap. In the last 2 years or so, we've had an African-American fire chief, a first, an African-American police chief, a first, an African-American director of planning?
No. So my IT director is Shawny. What?
A minority.
Yeah.
I just want to
not
make
African American, minority. The finance director I hired is minority. So the planning director I hired is Caucasian female.
Yes.
Assistant city manager is Caucasian female.
Yes.
And so those are the two I hired. When I came here, both Mike Malone, water director, is African American, and so is Terrence. And I did hire African American Judy Shepard Hall. She's our housing director.
Housing director. And the reason I want to make that clear is we've been articulating our concern for a very long time that our city had a slogan of being diverse, except for in its management. And one of the things that we pushed you on when we came to meet you was not just around the fire chief, not just around the police chief, but around our city looking like who it serves. Because if we study history, Ferguson and the issues of Ferguson had to do with where power lies. And so I just wanted to make sure that everyone listening today understands that it's critical that though we have problems, we can't discount the progress that's been made in this city in the last 3 years. To do so would be to allow them to be rolled back. Let me go to some things now that are a little more difficult for us to handle. And in just a moment, I want to raise an issue that's been talked about. We're going to move back to law enforcement. I want to deal with the first half of our conversation being about reform and the issues of reform. And because we can walk and chew gum at the same time, the second half of our conversation is going to be about quality of life, crime in our city. Because we've got too many mothers crying, too many fathers crying in our city. And they're not all crying because of police-related shootings. So let's have the difficult conversation. And I'm going to have an image put up on the screen in just a second. The image is of a police badge. And several members of our community came to me about this police badge. And I then started seeing it floating around on the internet. This is a 1907 Vallejo Police Department badge. If anyone looks at the badge, at the very top of the badge is a swastika. If anyone doesn't understand or know what a swastika is, it was a hate symbol of Nazi Germany that represented the extermination of the Jewish community. It has been picked up by neo-Nazis in America and virulent racists. This was the badge that the Vallejo Police Department had in 1907. This badge has resurfaced, as I understand it, in some police department communication in 2020. Is that true? What do you know about this badge? And what should our community know about this badge?
Well, I'd first like to say that the swastika has no place in America in policing. It should have no place in our community. It's despicable and disgusting. And I'll be honest, it's frankly disturbing that it was part of a 1907 badge associated to Vallejo. So I would want our community to understand that that in no way represents my values, the values of the vast majority of our police officers in the city of Vallejo, and it does not represent our city. I can't speak about personnel investigations because of the Police Officer Bill of Rights. That precludes me from talking about that. But I can assure the public that when something like that surfaces, we will do a thorough investigation and ensure that that does not surface again within our police department.
So I get that the Bill of Rights doesn't allow you to speak to it, and I want to take a moment in just a second to speak to the larger Police Officer Bill of Rights and the restrictions that it places on you all in this conversation. Not being able to say whether you're investigating it or not, so be it. If something like that were to occur, would that be something that we would call the Department of Justice and the FBI in to look at?
Well, I can say this, that when something like that does surface, it's investigated. And it's investigated thoroughly and will be objective. And at the end, we will take the necessary actions to correct that.
Okay.
So I would like to add to that, as the first time that we have seen that badge should have stayed in history. The badge shouldn't be, with that swastika, it shouldn't be showing up anywhere in today's, in our communities today, anywhere. And I will tell you that we do have the Department of Justice. It's part of what, part of the reform package here is we have a collaborative agreement with them. And soon after we found out about this badge, we did share that with them. And so certainly as they're looking at our operations and so forth, they are aware of this particular badge with the swastika.
Okay. So the Department of Justice is aware of it. And I suspect, and I want to be clear about this because I know several of the Vallejo police officers. I've known them personally. One of the reasons we're not anti-police, I have members who are in various law enforcement offices. I think the majority of police officers are amazing people with families and children who deserve to get home safely, who do the right thing. But I do think if there is anything in our culture that allows that to exist, it has to be rooted out with a swiftness. And that we as a city has to put a real clear concept. Mr. City Manager, tell me, has the City Council taken any type of vote or done any even symbolic gesture to condemn this type of thing if it does exist? Have they been asked to? Have they come to you and said, what resources do you need to deal with this kind of thing?
So again, as the chief indicated, there is an investigation going on to ensure we understand, all the reasons why it showed up. And once that's completed, I'm sure they will. So they are aware of it, and they have fully supported that this investigation be done. And once we have completed it, I'm sure there will be a report out and a comment from them.
Okay. Let me ask you about the City Council, Chief. Do you regularly meet with City Council members? Do they regularly ask to meet with you?
I would say that before I was sworn in, one of the City Council members reached out to me. That was Hakeem Brown, and we formed a relationship. We currently discuss things about public safety, what we can do for our youth, and on a bi-weekly basis. So we do sit down. I have not sat down like that. Like, I don't have the same relationship with the other council members as I do with Hakeem Brown. However, we do meet to discuss things, and they will reach out to me when they have things of concern. But on a bi-weekly basis or a monthly basis, no.
Okay.
Not regularly.
So, the reason I asked this, and I know you meet with the City Council quite regularly, Mr.
That's
City.
correct.
And are any of your meetings regularly on police reform, or are they just the general issues of the city?
So I do meet with the council members usually once a month, each one individually, one-on-one, and the mayor, we meet every week. And I would say, yes, we talk about all issues, but this has been top of the line issue for the last 3 or 4 months now. Kind of even before the OIR report, but certainly, kind of after the McCoy shooting, and then certainly Monte Rosa shooting, but we were waiting to see that report from OIR so we could kind of get our hands in. And Dr. Quick, if I could say this, I told you in the beginning that there was a full year I was here and things seemed to be fine.
Yeah.
You really had to be looking and noticing trends and things like that were happening to start wondering there's something that's not quite right here. And I believe, with all honesty, City Council, who has far less information than I do from a day-to-day basis, and certainly the chief has, they have been surprised at the extent of the reform needed in the department, the OIR report, and some of the other things that are happening now, some of the investigations, some of the reasons for those, and then these settlements that we've been having, and the fact of the matter, we have 20+ civil rights cases against the city right now are all very red flags flying high above, which is why reform is mandatory.
Let me stop you for a second, because you said they've been surprised. You've only been here about 3 years.
Correct.
Those lawsuits predate you, the majority of them, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so I'm going to say, and let me just be transparent, your bosses are the City Council. They hire you, correct? Okay. They don't hire me. I am utterly flabbergasted how a City Council that has been going through multiple lawsuits around police misconduct could even form the ability to tell you they're surprised. That's not about you, that's for them. I'm amazed how anybody who could be sitting on the City Council for more than 4 years could be surprised at anything. And one of the reasons we're doing this is for our voters and for our community members is it bothers me that we put bullseyes on the police chief and on the city manager who've just gotten here, and we're letting a city council, some of whom have been on the council for 8, 12 years, act like they didn't know what was going on. Now, this is not a question for you. This is me talking to a community of black and brown people to say, enough with the excuses. That we've been having conversations with you that we have not had with many of the city council. Many of our city council members will not meet with black people that they don't approve of. If we're going to be transparent and honest. And so I'm pressing you to, and we've been pressing you to, but far before this, things have been happening. You've inherited a system. And you've explained to me now that you've made some new hires, that the city looks more diverse, but there has to be an accountability. And this is why we did this before the election. We need people to understand where real accountability is. And we need people running for office this cycle and next cycle to account. If you've been on the city council 4 or more years before you got here, and you are surprised at the state of this city, you should not be running again for office. And I am concerned that all of a sudden in the last 3 months, everybody's so concerned about public safety, and they've been on the council for a long time. Let me ask a question, Chief. Eracism wrote both of you letters several months ago about if the union was participating in reform efforts. I asked you this question when we met a while ago, and we talked about the OIR report. At the time, you had not yet really had much interaction around the report and the union. The report was new. In our letter to you and the city manager, and we sent it to the city council and State Senator Dodd as well, and the supervisors, we asked about the union, and we received a Public Information Act about grievances that have been filed. Chief, there's some pictures on the screen that are going on the screen of your staff members that you've hired. Can you tell me about the new hires you have made? Tell me a little bit about their backgrounds and what you have asked them to do. Who is this person, and what have you asked this person to do?
So this person is a former officer, a 27-year vet, I believe, with the city of San Jose. He retired. Before he retired, he was a recruitment officer in the city of San Jose. I brought this gentleman on to help us to recruit a robust, comprehensive team of qualified employees for the city of Vallejo because of his professionalism, because of his expertise in recruitment.
Next picture.
And this picture is a picture of Tim Jackson. He was a former San Jose police officer, 28 years. He was also a recruiter for the city of San Jose, and I brought him to Vallejo in order to assist us. Everyone knows that we are very short-staffed and we need additional support, but these two individuals have an expertise that really can assist us in getting the applicants that we need on our force. And they understand what diversity and inclusion is. They know how to go about recruiting a police officer that reflects our community.
Okay, so there's one more picture. We'll get to that in a second. My understanding is that there has now been filed a grievance about the hiring of these two staff people. And my question becomes a much larger question. Can you tell me, are you a member of the union?
No, I'm not.
How many officers are not members of the Vallejo Police Union?
When I was hired, it was just the police chief. I was not a member. The assistant police chief that we've been able to hire is also not a member of the police association.
What is the concern, because these two officers are African Americans.
Yes.
They have served as duly sworn police officers, so they know the culture.
Yes.
Why is the union grieving their hire?
They believe that the work that they're doing should be done by a sworn police officer.
Is there something in the law that says that?
Not that I'm aware of. This is a currently ongoing grievance, and it's not up to me to determine those facts. It has to go through the process.
Mr. City Manager, one of the findings in the OIR report was a lack of diverse hiring in the department. And the findings said that there is a woeful lack of women and people of color. The city's human resources comes under your office, is that correct?
Correct.
How are police officers hired in this city? Those two gentlemen are recruiters. Does this process go through the city's HR? Has it always gone through the city's HR? Have you made changes based upon this report in how the city hires police officers?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things coming in after I did my assessment was to look at our process. We need to have a strong working relationship with the human resource analysts and our department, our city department. We also need to include citizens in our process so that citizens can sit on a panel, and when the officers that are required to do an interview, our citizens, our residents, are part of that process. So the current process now includes our community members. It includes our human resource department. And it also includes our officers who sit on those panels. So definitely we have a stronger working relationship with our human resource department, and we have a stronger relationship with our community members who can now look at our candidates and decide whether or not they would make a good police officer.
So Chief, prior to us making these reform changes, the recruitments occurred internally with the police department, and there was some communication with human resources, but they were not any significant part of the process. So it was through the police department. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at in the reform and restructuring process here, is that that's not done completely by police. And if I may add to your question about those two recruiters, Chief Williams came to me and asked me, we have numerous vacancies here and we're not very successful having this happening basically in-house with the police department. And he said, I'd like to hire these two gentlemen. And I said, absolutely, we need to fill a lot of slots in here. And the benefit of it, these are professional people who we're going to look for diversity to answer the questions that were outlined in the OIR report. And so fully supported him in that decision. And certainly we will continue to pursue that same diversity.
So let me follow up on what you just said, Mr. City Manager, because I think it's important. I think anybody who's run an organization, I run a small organization here, human resources are critical. And I want to educate our community about the Police Officers' Bill of Rights very quickly. I have been telling the citizens of Vallejo that I hear my voice to research that, because it is the most important document in police reform. California has one of the top 3 in the United States by many justice analysts, one of the top 3 most protective Bill of Rights in the country. It makes it very, very difficult to discipline, to fire, and to speak about issues of discipline and employment in the state of California. And I think our police officers should be protected. They do a tough job. Being black, living is a tough job. So I get toughness. But I think when you have the ability to take somebody's life, you adopt a more difficult scrutiny. You should be ready for that. This report tells me that there's been a historic lack of diversity in this department. What I just heard you explain to me is that prior to the reforms that you all have made, the department hired from within itself. Is that what I heard you say?
the process. They were in charge of the process. It was not the human resources or outside of the police department. It was all internal.
So all of the human resources prior to the reforms you are making was inside the department?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So I want our audience to sort of hear this. What we've just heard is the second major reform that you two have done is an attempt to move the human resources department from internal to the department to the larger human resources system in the city, and to bring community interaction to the hiring process.
That's correct.
And has that been received well?
It's currently being grieved.
Being grieved, right. So right now, the union is taking you to court to go back to the previous way that this was being done.
That's correct.
Okay. And I think it's important because I read, I hear a lot of stuff on social media, and I think, do people really understand how difficult it is to transform a multi-million dollar organization within a highly charged political environment where secrecy is baked into the system, right? And so I think it's important that transparency, and this is why I appreciate you being here, Mr. City Manager, because I do understand that you work for politicians. And if they think it's better for their political fate to throw you under the bus and take no responsibility, they may do that. You would never say that, but I can say that. And so you both have to navigate waters because you both have to negotiate with the union, around a number of these issues. Steve, can you put up the third picture of an employee that the union is grieving? Can you tell me who this is, Chief?
This is Ms. Brittany Jackson. She's our current public information officer.
Ms. Jackson, why are they grieving Ms. Jackson?
The position she now fills, about a year ago, I believe it was in May of 2019, the city put in for a position for a communication analyst to come to the police department. The city recognized that we needed better communication to bridge the gap between the police department and our community. So we needed a professional to come in and help us with that. During a national search, Ms. Brittany Jackson was hired. She has a master's degree in journalism, and she is a professional journalist. The reason that the association is grieving her position is because they're alleging that the position was formerly filled by a police officer, and they believe that that is a position that belongs to them.
Okay, again, you did a national search. Ms. Jackson is born and raised in Vallejo.
That's correct.
Is that correct? She's a child of Vallejo. I'm going to notice, because you all may not notice this, but all three people, and Steve, if you can go through all three pictures real quick, all three people happen to be African American. Now, I'm not sure if it should surprise me that someone or anyone who might present a badge with a swastika might be annoyed that you're doing this African American hiring. But it seems to me very problematic that we just happen to have these problems. When you hear in page 3 of the report, and you all don't have this, but I'll read page 3 of the report. The impacts on performance are multifaceted. One of them we noted is an us against the world mindset. That, while understandable, is fraught with potential pitfalls, particularly in the arena of shifting social attitudes regarding law enforcement accountability and responsiveness to the community. Much of the department seems to have an aggrieved perspective toward local politicians, the media, and its critics in the activist and legal communities, including an active plaintiffs bar. You hired Ms. Jackson to come and to create a better public relationship with the department. I noticed during the last homicide that the Times-Herald reported on the homicide, quoting officials from the police union. I thought that was kind of strange. Then as I read the article, at the bottom of the article, it says, these details were then confirmed by the public information officer. I thought, because I'm not that bright, that that was out of order. I could not figure out why the union was commenting on an active crime situation, and it was being confirmed by the public information officer. It seemed to me, and you two can correct me, that the public information officer is the official voice of the department next to you and should be giving the community details on active crime scenes. Am I wrong on that?
No, you're not wrong. The official information that comes out of the police department comes from our public information officer, the office of the chief. She works for the office of the chief. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So it is a bit backwards that someone who is being paid and charged to speak about an active crime situation is not doing it. But someone who is not charged with that is doing it. Does the department and does the city find that problematic, and have you all explored that? Is there some type of investigation about that?
So first of all, I would say that indeed I have a public relations person that works for the remainder of the city, but as Chief said, we felt the need was there for our police department to have a representative that worked directly for him and with him on public communications. And so doing this for a lot of years, police labor associations, fire associations, all associations can say what they want in representation of their membership. Doesn't have to be accurate, doesn't have to be, the facts, doesn't have to be any of that information. They can take positions on whatever they want, and there's nothing we could do that would stop that. Now, certainly, I guess I didn't realize that that statement was made, so, we certainly I would have question for them to use our city communications officer to verify things, to point at her for that, but certainly they're entitled to do that, but the official statements come from and through our public relations people.
Okay. Let's move on to another issue that's been talked about a lot, bent badges. And we recognize that, again, the Police Officers' Bill of Rights doesn't allow you all to say certain things. But this bent badges issue came about when?
I ordered a official inquiry into this badge bending when I was first notified about it by a news source. The actual incident is currently under investigation. It occurred prior to me being sworn in. So that's under investigation. The facts need to be determined about that. But I will say this, it's despicable. If the celebrating of a killing of a human being, if that is done under the power of authority or under, by a police officer in our department, it's despicable. It will not be tolerated. And anyone who does that does not deserve to wear our patch. They should not be allowed to wear our badge and represent our community. So that will not be tolerated. That is currently under investigation.
Okay. Mr. City Manager, did you want to add something to that?
I do, because certainly it is a very, well, first of all, it is despicable. And most despicable to me that there appears to be some evidence that it has continued even while I've been here. And so for me, it was mentioned to me probably a year and a half ago that there was bent badges. And so I approached the police chief, because to me, there's very few things that are worse than that. You're celebrating the death of a human being. And as I then talked to the then chief and asked him about it, he told me that it had been investigated. It was a while ago, it was a while back, it had been investigated, and it had been taken care of and handled.
Okay.
So with that information, as is in most cases, you know, you look back at hindsight and you say, I probably should have probed what that meant. Because I think today we're finding that there wasn't anything done, and that unfortunately, it was indicated it was years past, even before me coming here. But unfortunately, I think we're investigating it for it even happening in the much more near present. And so it will be investigated. And those who have participated, both Chief and I, have very strong feelings about that should never, ever happen, that anybody ever does that. And so there will be accountability. So there's people saying I knew about it, I was part of it. You know, there's things out there. I went to barbecues with celebrations. That's absolutely not true. The only information I had was that it was brought to me as a potential concern. And again, when you're the city manager, you depend on people to be doing their investigations and to deal with them and discipline people as necessary, just like Chief Williams is doing, as he announced before we started. And so we're doing it now because unfortunately it appears to be true. And we need to know everybody that was involved in it.
So let me stop you there for a second. This is supposed to be, this happened prior to both of you arriving, correct? And when it came to your attention a year and a half ago, you then went to the then chief and said, we need to look into this. You were told it's been looked into, not true. Tonight you began this broadcast by announcing that an officer has been relieved of duty.
That's correct.
My understanding, this is the first time in this department's history, recent history, that an officer has been released for some gun-involved offense. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so I'm wondering, based upon the OIR report and where the two of you are right now, how do you feel police reform is going in the city of Vallejo?
I can say that when I was sworn in, accountability, transparency, and inclusion were key. It was something that I swore and committed to do. It's a process, and it's going to take time, but we're moving in the right direction. It is a new day, and there is accountability. The officers understand that there's been failure in the past, and we need to acknowledge that failure. However, my job as chief of police is to establish a new culture and to begin to move forward. I've always said that accountability starts with active supervision, strong policy and oversight, and we have to hold ourselves accountable. And so that's where we're moving. With the OIR report, with the team that we have in place, with the collaborative agreement that we have with the Department of Justice, we're moving in that direction. And so I can only say from my end and from on behalf of the city, we will have reform. We will transform our police department.
So I think that's a great question because I've been here almost 3 years now. So I've been here for a year of thinking things were fine. And then the door opens up and you get to go inside and see what's really happening. And so as a manager, as doing the city managing for 27 years, having numerous other police departments, every manager and every employee needs to know where their boundaries are. And they need to know where their boundaries are, and if they cross those boundaries, they'll be held accountable. When those boundaries are crossed and people are not held accountable, that widens and expands those boundaries. And those boundaries have been left pretty wide and open in the past. And I think that's called up in the OIR report about investigations and internal affairs issues, a number of places, and I think that's what we're seeing. And so what Chief Williams is doing with my full support is we're doing independent investigations now. And as you see, as Chief announced tonight, there is accountability now. And so I think the majority of the men and women of the department actually are relieved and want to see this. And I'll say where I think it's going. I think we're at a tipping point. We are pushing a lot of changes. There has been these challenges, and they've been resisting these changes. They've sent me a letter and said, we're ready to work now with us, so we're scheduling a meeting with myself and our whole team and their whole labor association where they said, we're ready to come on board with reform. So we shall see. But I think that the department itself understands that they understand that the boundaries are being reset to be fair, just, to treat everyone equally with respect, and we won't tolerate some of the things that have been happening in the past. And those that want to continue that behavior will be held accountable. We don't want to investigate our department and our employees every day, all day long, because I don't think we need to. I think they're relieved overall that there's someone in who says, this is what I expect of you, here's my vision, and if you don't, and those who don't, we'll be held accountable, and they'll be removed or disciplined if necessary. So I think we're at that tipping point, and I would tell everybody, now more than ever, the man sitting between us, Dr. Quick, Chief Shawny Williams, needs our support because he's right there day to day with his department, and I believe they're coming around as a majority of them, but there's still resistance, and we have to just push through it to make it change. And I think the urgency is very high for us because we see, we know what things have been going on, and I've been looking at the cases, the civil rights cases. Those have to stop. The only way they stop is our actions have to change, and our accountability has to change, and we have to do policing well. So there's a real urgency. So push us, but support us, because we're bound and determined, committed to do it.
Let's make a quick shift, because I think we're going to move towards an end sooner than later. Let's talk about the quality of life issues in our city. A number of us, all of us affiliated with Eracism, talk to citizens every day. Again, whether it's a school, we have people working in schools talking to parents, we have pastors, we have nonprofit leaders. We're a variety of groups. With Eracism signed up initially were more than 125 African American organizations and individuals. There's a great concern that there are too many mothers and fathers crying. Vallejo is not unique to that. All over the country, since COVID, certain crimes have risen, people have found themselves in tight situations. The economy works for Wall Street and not for the low-income communities. Vallejo was already in trouble. This notion of defunding the police is not necessarily something that I think we should talk about as much as the city was defunded. And Mr. City Manager, I've had several conversations with you about my real deep concern that our city does not have a dedicated youth property outside of schools, that we don't have a Boys and Girls Club, we don't have places that our youth can go to and get development. I think that's a real problem. Does the city have a budget approved yet?
We do for the current year, yes.
But there's been a great deal of debate for the next cycle, correct?
So certainly with COVID and shutting the businesses down, we have dipped into our reserves to just fund the operations that we currently have. And so, yeah, there's been a lot of debate, is there discretionary funds? So what I would say is in November, we will get our audit report and our first quarter sales tax numbers, which will tell us a lot about where we are. But we are down in revenues, so even the needs we have will have to be restricted. I had to freeze 52 vacant positions, none in police and fire, because we needed that public safety, so they're in public works and other places.
There was a lot of conversation about the police budget being exorbitant. Where does our police budget stand in relation to the cities around us? What percentage of our police budget are we bloated as it relates to cities around us? Does it need to be cut? Help me understand this.
So one thing everybody needs to understand is every city is different. So I'll go back one city. So my city budget was double what it is here in the city of Vallejo. But part of that is because we don't have a recreation department, for instance. We don't have a wastewater, or we don't have stormwater. So you don't have those dollar budgets. So the majority of the revenue that comes in is for public safety, because that's what we do as the two biggest departments. So your percentages are going to look higher for police and fire, but as far as the numbers go, they're very consistent with what you see in other places. In some cities, I think Richmond, we saw a significantly higher amount in their budget, and certainly the number of officers that work there. So being from other cities, it's very normal to have your police department be around 50% of your budget. That's normal anywhere. But here especially, because you don't have other budgets, like a recreation budget's gonna be 10% or 12%. So when you don't have that, it's just gonna look bigger in police and fire, when actually they're probably less when you look at it on a percentage basis.
So I want to talk because for many of the seniors in our community, and many people who aren't familiar with government funding processes, this conversation was confusing. What this conversation said is we need to defund the police because the police budget is too big. Look at the percentage of the budget in the city. What you've just explained to us is that municipalities budget different things depending upon what's under their responsibilities. Our city budget doesn't include wastewater management. It doesn't include a number of things as you've just laid out. So those numbers are going to look different in comparison to municipalities that operate all of those things. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So that when we look at this, and I tell members of our community all the time, if people can be really easy in explaining something to you, they're not explaining everything to you. Complicated problems cannot be summed up in one sentence. We owe it to the members of this community who don't do government budgeting every day to give them the nuances. You're the guy who handles the numbers every day. You're telling me that in comparison to other cities, Benicia, Napa, Fairfield, our police budget in a one-to-one conversation, not factoring population difference, factoring in other city issues, is not overly bloated.
When you look at this, typically you're going to look at the size of the city. That's the easiest way to compare that and look police department to police department. So no, it definitely is not overly bloated. And I think what else I would say, so to understand what the police department budget is and the fire department, it's two things. What's one thing? Well, it's two. It's the men and women who are on the police department. It's their salary and wages and benefits. And in fire, it's their salary, their wages, and benefits. There isn't much else to cut out of that. So if you were going to cut, you would have to cut the people out of the department. So if I asked the chief who did some work, you need to cut something. He can't say, well, I'm gonna cut $3 million out of this, I don't know, some frivolous account that he uses to, I don't know, take them to Tahiti or something somewhere for a vacation. He has no accounts other than the people that work for him. It's basically the salaries. So that's why when people call for defunding, and I continue to say, no, we need to hold fast on the budget for police and fires, because we're at minimal levels when it comes to men and women in our police department, and the crime rates you see are not acceptable. We have 2 fire stations closed still since we went through bankruptcy. And so to cut them even more would be even deeper and go back closer towards where we were in bankruptcy than it would be to at least hold fast to what we have.
Before you arrived, the city made bankruptcy agreements. Those agreements have a time span to them. Help the average citizen watching today that doesn't understand the intricacies of PERS and those kind of things. Give me 3 basic points if you were trying to teach me how to budget how the budget of the city works around police and fire. Can you do that? I know this is putting you on the spot, but I need three. You're telling me that if he's going to cut anything in the police budget, he has nothing to do but fire officers. That's the only cuts he can make, right? Does he set their salaries?
He does not. So great question. And it's asked all the time, and it's misunderstood a lot of times. So you have a base salary for men and women men and women in the police and fire department. It's a base salary. And they do get pensions because obviously, if you look at a firefighter and they're up fighting fires now, their ability to keep doing this when they're 55 and 60, they're my age, is not going to be very good. The ability for a police officer. So they have lower retirement ages, and they also have higher percentages. So that's what we say when we say PERS, their pension. Their pension is a very large expense, and because the folks that have managed it have estimated that the returns on all the money that we paid in over the years would be more than the interest we're actually getting. They're looking at 7%, and you know what interest rates are. We've fallen behind. So right now, we are at a deficit that we have to pay more for their benefits every year because of that deficit that has been occurred over time. So it's their base salary, it's their pension and benefits. Those are the two costs associated with police and fire budgets. You do have, operations, you have new police vehicles, you have to maintain those. So those are the three things. But if you have to maintain your vehicles, otherwise they don't come when you dial 911. And so all those are just essential to you. So I don't know if that helps. Yeah. Those are the basic costs in the police department.
Is the Vallejo Police Department the highest paid department in the Bay Area?
No.
Are you close to the highest paid department in the Bay Area?
So what happens when we look at the salaries for all of our employees is we try to look and do surveys of like agencies, not just Bay Area, because Bay Area, they're much higher in the Bay Area than what they are here. That's just standard. So we actually look up towards Vacaville and Fairfield and Sacramento. We look that way too because there's lower wages there. But what we did approve raises for police and fire when I first got here because they were more than 10% below what would be a market level. So what does that mean when you're trying to recruit people or trying to get good officers to come over and work for your department? They're not going to come because the wages are lower. So we did an agreement to give them 3%, which basically keeps up with inflation and the cost of living. But so we're still 10% below what you'll find the market, and the market would be Bay Area cities and Central Valley or Sacramento, Fairfield, Vacaville type area.
Okay, 10% below. I just want us to hear, and I want the people watching to hear what the facts are, because I've even watched a few forums for elected candidates, and I was particularly surprised that many people running for office couldn't explain PERS. And the city council votes on these budgets and understand these issues. And so I think for the black community, we've got to make sure that we ask people running and asking for our votes to understand these and not just throw us slogans, but to really give us the reality, because the New York Times just did an article on the George Floyd defunding movement, and now that they're in the weeds of that, the city has had to back up everything they said they were doing. I'm concerned that Vallejo is having a rhetorical conversation and not a policy conversation. And I think it's important that we understand the policy. Chief, let me ask you, how many homicides have there been in the city of Vallejo this year?
22.
How many were there last year?
I can't tell you what we had, but we have more this year.
So we're up.
That's correct.
How many of those homicides do you have? Can you tell me the demographic breakdown of those homicides? Is there, I think there's a slide or something. Oh, yeah. So this is your department's statistics. And this is why we're having this conversation. And I'm going to ask Steve to leave this this up for a second. I think it's important that we look at the fact that when it comes to homicides, 84% of them, if I'm reading this properly, are African Americans. Is that 67%? Is that, no, 84% are African American?
I think what we're looking at is a chart that goes back from 2010 to 2019. I think that's a 10-year chart.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think it's quite that those are victims.
It says victim race.
Yes.
84% black.
Out of the total, I believe it should be 162. If you could look at the
162,
top.
17 median a year. We're already at 22.
That's correct.
For this year.
Yes.
We're not yet through October. 84% of those murders have been African American.
Those are victims. So 84 out of the 162 are African American.
Are African American.
Over the last 10 years.
Over the last 10 years.
Yes.
This is disturbing to many people because these are happening in our communities. What is your plan to deal with some of this?
So we recently announced Operation Peace. Peace is an acronym that stands for Predictive Enforcement and Community Engagement. It's a 4-part plan for crime reduction to reduce the amount of gun violence and violence that's occurring in the city of Vallejo. And what it is redeploying resources from the police department to a team of officers that go into these hot spots, these areas where the shootings and homicides are occurring. But it also is designed to produce positive engagements with our community members. And so that's the first part is redeployment. Second part is we understand that we can't do this by ourselves, so we have to form partnerships. And we've done that with state, local, and federal partners in order to go after the prolific offenders in our community, gun offenders. We know very often it's a small group of people that are committing a majority of the shootings and homicides and things that are occurring in our community. The other part of that is enhancing our technology. So we're deploying cameras and other things that can help be force multipliers for us. The third part of that, and I think an essential part, is developing relationships. We call them the 4 C's with our clergy, with our community members, with the cops, and with our city council members so that we can combat what's happening. So we want to do that. We call it, pie. Everyone has a piece of the pie. So it's through prevention, intervention, and enforcement. So the prevention piece is actually doing some early childhood education and youth development. The intervention piece is to actually try to stop the at-risk youth that have guns, that are doing a lot of our shootings. There's a group called Advanced Peace. There's other partners within our community that can help us to do that. And then we have the enforcement. So it's a 4-part plan, Operation Peace. It's been very positive, and it's been very successful over the last 3 weeks that we've been doing this.
So you've just been doing this 3 weeks?
Yes.
City Manager, let me ask you. The chart I just saw, I think, is a public health problem, right? It's not a crime problem. It's a public health problem. There are a lot of factors that contribute to it. When people have been huddled into the same spaces with poverty mounted on top of it, you all have agreed to have a conversation with us and the president of the school board and another school board member, which we still want to have, so we can talk about how education plays into this. When you have lack of employment, when you have lack of quality mental health, one of the things we pushed the two of you on was a psychologist within our department that can help communities that have been impacted by violence, both police violence and intra-community violence. someone who could help do workshops and community things. You both have agreed to that. Is that not correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
So that part of piece and the other pieces here is that the department is going to make a commitment to having a full-time psychologist to help this community think about things like the spillover effect, how violence creates disruptions in nervous systems and psychological impact. I think that's important. From the city's view, Mr. City Manager, what has been the conversation both from your level and the city council's level to deal with this public health crisis? I know we're in a finance crisis, but how does a lack of youth opportunity in the city, how does a lack of youth sports facilities, the Mare Island sports facility is now closed, where they would go play basketball regular. How does the employment situation, COVID, give me a view of how you see the larger issues of the city impacting the policing situation?
So all of those issues, the recreation opportunities, the employment opportunities, are the underlying factor that directly cause the types of criminal activity we're seeing. You know, when you talk to people about, you know, so Chief and I had a presentation from the gentleman that started the Advanced Peace Project, correct, out of Richmond.
That's correct.
And I will challenge our entire community that we, it's $700,000 to do a full year of the project, but it really goes to try to help the 20 highest people in our community who aren't in the legal system yet, but we know they're violent and they're using guns, to try to reach them and to change them and get them out of that. And it's showed great success stories. So I think when we talk about the policing side, but here is a much different side where there's two people that basically they go talk to these 20 people and really try to work with them to get them out of the fact that in their mind a job is earning $200, might be robbing or stealing something, and that's a better job than anything else they can get. And so they've got that mentality. So if we don't give them better jobs or better opportunities for jobs, that's the only thing they have. And so I would say to you, and I have to be careful, but there were lots of great ideas that came forward and have come forward since all of the conversation has finally got to a point where we're having the hard discussions about psychiatrists. And by the way, we absolutely agreed with that psychiatrist, because not only was it there for family members who had been the victims of an officer-involved shooting, or family members that are victims of homicides, but our officers face those challenges every day too. So it would be kind of for the whole circle. But in today's, as I look at the 5-year projections for the city's budgets, you're really at a break-even level. The revenue that's going to come in as we project it out is the same increase there as the same as the increase in the expenditures. And so for at least 5 years, probably more now with COVID hitting, because you went back a little bit, you'll be at the same funding level for police and fire. And so one of the things that we have talked about, and yes, Measure G is as a 3/4 cent sales tax increase. It does make our tax rate up into where Oakland's is, and pretty one of the higher ones in the Bay Area. But the intent is that we listened to people and said, if you want to put, and I'm suggesting $1.8 million into job opportunities for our youth and apprenticeships and work with the labor groups to really put a school together that can help our kids, and to do early childhood learning, and to really focus on giving them direct opportunity from school to a job. And so that's in there. And so you talk about the psychiatrist and how mobile health crisis units for homeless and for mentally ill people. We put some funding in for that because we realize that it's not just all putting it for police and fire, which they could use. So of the 12 million, we have, my idea is about 6.7 that would go towards police and try to enhance their abilities through community policing, more patrol, but also to take on these community quality of life issues you talk about. that goes to the very root of who our children are, and what they have to live in every day.
So I want to turn to some questions from the community really quickly. You mentioned Measure G. Measure G as a 3% tax would go towards youth development, job programming, health resources for mental health. That's what Measure G is for, correct?
So I need to make sure I say it, because there'll be people. So it's a 0.75 cent increase in your sales tax. So
correct.
When you buy, other than for food, so food doesn't get taxed. So that raises about $12 million. So that question is going to the voters this November.
Correct.
And for me, it's the voters' choice, the community's choice on basically a status quo, or we can put these monies and invest these monies into various things. So what I will be proposing in front of City Council is breaking these funds up. We can't be specific about these because it's called a general tax. I know we're getting into budget stuff.
But we need to be able to explain that to people.
Yeah.
It's called a general tax, but who would decide how that's spent?
So the City Council would decide each budget year, but what they're going to be looking at is providing a resolution, say, we intend to spend the money in the following areas. And I have sent them my suggestions, which generally are it's a $12 million a year revenue.
Yeah.
So 6.7 is to enhance and reform the police department, and through patrol, community service officers, things that don't necessarily take patrol officers, that we can address more of the issues and concerns of the victims of our community. And then 1.8 million, we're actually looking for youth and job opportunities. Homeless, there's $500,000 that we put in there. $800,000 will go towards trying to better find a way where you don't have men and women, police officers, going to answer mental illness calls, which is what happens now.
So a non-lethal police force.
Yes.
And this is what you are proposing.
Correct.
Is your proposal public somewhere?
It is not yet, but it will be brought up on October 13. Is that the next Tuesday?
Yes.
And on October
14. October 14.
Is there a way on or before October 14th that the public can see your proposal?
They will be able to see it posted on Thursday prior to October 14. So whatever. So Tuesday's the 14, 13.
Okay, so I think it's important. It will be listed where?
It's on our website. So if you go and look at council agendas, if you just go city council meetings, and you look up under agendas, it should be posted the Thursday before the 14th meeting. It should be posted, and it will outline the areas I'm recommending that the funding be spent.
So I'm going to recommend to everyone that you take the opportunity and that someone pulls it and posts it so that we can see what the city manager is proposing and then get some idea of what the city council is willing to do, change. Because if you're not informed, then you can't challenge the council to operate in ways that are in your best interest. Mental health, those types of things. Let's get ready to take some questions. My last question for you is around sexual assaults. What is the current number of reported sexual assaults in the city? Do you know?
I don't have that number. I think we may have given some data to you.
Okay, here. I do think this is important. Is this number 96? In 2019, there were 125 sexual assaults reported. Already we're at 95 reported sexual assaults. And I am concerned that Latino and African American, mostly women, are impacted by this. And so one of the most, I get sideshows. I get there are sideshows, people aren't happy with sideshows. I get that. But I watched a city council meeting where there was deep, deep conversation about sideshows. And there's a war on black and brown women in this city. And that disturbed me. How many investigators do you have currently looking into sex crimes in this city?
Well, we currently have 5 detectives, and they are tasked with investigating homicides, shootings, robberies, rape, child sexual assault. They are tasked with all crimes. Is that enough to meet the current demand for our city? No.
So there are 5 people who are tasked with investigating every rape, every homicide, every robbery. 5 people.
5 detectives, yes.
Okay.
So may I comment on that?
Yeah.
So Chief said 5 detectives. No, that's not enough. So if you keep looking at those statistics, so I looked at the word rape, which I find it just hurts me. I have a daughter, but 73, I think there were 73 of them back in August. There's 1,000+ stolen vehicles. And I asked the chief, how many of those stolen vehicles, if you have your car stolen from Vallejo, is one of those detectives gonna be able to investigate it and find it for me, Chief?
No, that's a property crime.
None of them?
No, they're focused on violent crime.
None of them. So the amount of detective work is they're busier than ever with 22 homicides, which is nearing a record pace for the city of Vallejo. And then you have these rapes and sexual assault crimes and shootings. Shootings are in the couple 200 some. That's in addition to the homicides.
That's correct.
5 people to investigate those. You know, to me, families aren't getting, we want to be able to fight for them and find out who did that, certainly to take those people off the street, but just to give them peace at the end of the day and say, we found out who did this, but that's not happening now. It's impossible for him to do that with 5 detectives.
And I want to say for the people listening, to think that black people don't care about that means you're not talking to black people. We definitely care about the state of our communities, about the protection of our sons and our daughters. I have a daughter, but when women are assaulted and no one's dealing with that issue, it's a real problem. And I think we've got to start having serious conversations about the state of our city that's not just one-liners. A lot of black people are hurting in this city, and it's painful. It's painful for me because I pray with them. And I know these kids, and we got to do better, but the adults aren't doing better. We're not having real conversations. And so there are going to be some people who are angry that we're having this conversation. I don't care. If we can educate this community about the real issues and stop this nonsense that's going around Facebook and deal with the pain of people, this is worth it. Deborah Dixon and Edison Kelly, Dr. Edison Kelly, are monitoring along with the other members of Eracism. We have community questions. We're going to open it up to community questions. Sister Dixon has the first question for you.
Yes, there are a number of questions, but this one particular one said, would you please clarify for the community, they thought the chief had no authority to fire a police officer, so they really would like you to clarify that, please.
So how is it that you got to the point, what is the process in which you can relieve a police officer of duty?
So we have a process that has to go through an official investigation. It's an administrative process. Once the facts are determined in that process, I have the authority to issue, if the actions warrant discipline, a notice of intent to discipline. That's the first part of the process. Once that's given, each employee has a right, a scaly right, an appeals right, and they have to, that would be, say, the second part of the process if they say, we want to go to scaly, and most do. After that scaly, I have to review those facts and make a determination on discipline. If the facts stand, that notice of intent to discipline is issued. After that, the employees still have a right to appeal that. So it's a process. I'm just kind of explaining the entire process. I can make a recommendation for termination, which would need to be supported by the city manager. If that's supported, yes, we do have the authority to make that notice of intent to discipline or discipline of whatever that may be.
Who hears the appeal?
City manager?
So we have had other we have had another termination when Chief Alio was here, and so the process is that individual would then appeal to the chief, go through the facts. So there's a notice of termination. They get a hearing with the chief, and then the chief renders the final decision in regards to the termination. So I have never been in my entire career, nor have I been here, involved in the disciplinary actions of the police department at all. I'm not in the process.
But there's an appeal.
Yes.
Who does the appeal go to? If you're making the recommendation, they're not appealing to you.
So they can go to the Civil Service Board, say, for example, if they are terminated.
Okay, so they can go to an outside board.
That's correct.
Okay, so the termination, you used the word recommend.
The notice of intent to terminate, yes.
Then goes to an outside board.
Well, they can go to Skelly, and
Yeah.
then I make a notice of discipline.
So somebody shoots someone tomorrow. You can't go to that crime scene and tomorrow have a press conference and say, I fired this officer.
So when you have a shooting, there's going to be a criminal investigation as well as an administrative investigation. And we have to wait, I have to wait as chief for the facts of those to be determined. Once the facts are determined and I look at the finished case, then I'll make a determination.
Okay. Because I think many citizens are watching what happened in other places where the police, maybe George Floyd, where the police came out 3 days later or so and said, we've fired this officer. You in the state of California have a different process you have to go through.
Yes, the state of California has its own process, yes.
Okay, all right. Next question, Dr. Kelly.
This question is regarding a report made about individuals going to the homes of city council members and the city manager and harassing. Is there going to be any type of investigation or actions taken to support that or deal with that?
Are people going to your home to intimidate you, Mr. City Manager?
7 a.m. one morning, there was, my camera indicated there was people on my front porch, and they dropped off several flyers that stated, fire the city manager. They taped them to my mailbox, put them on my vehicles, taped them to the light pole across the street, put them on my neighbors' homes, their doorsteps, and their vehicles. And, you know, we did talk to the chief about it, but, you know, we do still live in a free world, but I see it as intimidation. And obviously, you know, that's my private place. My wife, you know, is home, and it was disturbing. It was. But, you know, to me I'm not here for people on that side. I'm here for this community. And as you said, there's a lot of hurting people here. That's who we want to help. And I would hope they discontinue that behavior of coming to people's homes. They did go to several council members' homes as well, and chalked their driveways or did other things as well. So indeed, we have had some people coming to our homes and doing things, certainly, for instance, to put posters to fire me, you know, on my doorstep and on my neighbors' doorsteps and cars.
I get that, but does your wife make city policy? I don't understand why we would terrorize someone's family. That seems fundamentally unethical and immoral. And we can disagree on policy, but that's what elections are for. I can tell you, because many of us have been approached by this, the larger African American community is not involved in that. African Americans have a history with a group called the Ku Klux Klan. And the Klan would come to our homes late at night and put burning crosses in our yards to intimidate us. Black people typically don't participate in that type of behavior. And those who do don't understand the history of terrorism that our community has gone through. So I can say that the larger population of African Americans that we represent have no hand in that type of behavior.
And I will simply say there are two people on camera, and neither of them were African Americans. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Next question.
How are police officers selected in Vallejo?
So the selection process, we talked a little bit about that with our recruitment. Our community members are now included in that process. It's a long process. It takes about 18 months from recruitment to training in the academy to going through the background process and completing the field training process that an officer becomes a solo, what we call a solo beat officer. But they're selected through the recruitment process as well as the vetting process of an interview and physical agility testing and a thorough background that's done.
Another question, and I guess it's for both of you. What do you like about your job, and what does a good work day look like for you?
Well, I'll go first. I'll say it's the people, right? It's the team that we have. One of the best things today, we were talking about how we rally around each other as a team. And Mr. Nyhoff was talking about how we have to take care of each other so that we can take care of our community. So the best part of my job is serving. It's serving the people. It's being around the people, having discussions like this, and making a difference. So I feel fortunate and blessed just to be around good people.
There are, these are the 27 years of being a city manager. These are the most challenging times, even going through the Great Recession. That was a single issue. You knew you had financial difficulty, people were suffering. Here, there are many issues going on at the same time. Pandemics, financial crisis, social unrest, and then the need for police reform. So every day throughout my career, I've made a decision that a good day would be a day when I was able to help someone to actually improve their quality of life. And so to me, it's just getting an email from somebody who says, thank you for an employee that did something well for them or followed up on a service call. That's what we do. And when the chief can solve a crime out over there, or he can help someone, or a fire department saved a baby, that is a good day for me in the city of Vallejo.
Ms. Dixon.
Wonderful, thank you. We appreciate that. What about reopening cold cases with a new investigation team? That's a question that came up.
Absolutely. We need resources. And I presented a 5-year staffing model of what exceptional policing would look like and the resources that would be necessary to do that. Absolutely. If we had a number of detectives to have a cold case team, to have different units within the department to investigate thoroughly our sexual assaults, our homicides, our robberies, our shootings. And if we had that, absolutely I would dedicate resources to do that. But it does take resources, and that's something that we're moving towards having. But in the meantime, it's important that we develop partnerships, that we maximize the relationships that we have so that we can deliver service. And as I listen to Dr. Quick talk, one of the key things for me is that we have what we call trauma-informed care, that we're providing services to the victims. I came in this morning, there was a baby that had been, that was a victim of parental abduction that was in our police department today. And when I saw that we should have space, for our domestic violence victims, our child victims. We should have a room that's specially dedicated to those types of victims. And we should also have services available to them on a 24-hour basis. And so that's something that we're working towards now. Yeah.
Question, and the question is about what are we doing about the homelessness in Vallejo, because that's becoming a very big issue.
Homelessness has been a big issue for a long time, and it's certainly gotten worse here. So we do have a navigation center that is one of a few that are built already in the state of California. We'll be building one starting it before the end of this year. We're scheduled for a November groundbreaking. And again, that's over 100 beds to help the homeless people. And then we were very active with Project Room Key, which helped bring the homeless into some of the hotels locally, and we've applied for funding from the governor for Project Home Key, which actually will help us purchase and remodel old hotel or old buildings so that we can house folks there. Temporarily, we're discussing right now to set up what would be a temporary type of tent camp. As you see, the biggest place that we have homeless issues right now is on Sacramento and Wilson. And so that would give them a place where they've got, sanitary conditions, make sure that's where they get served food. We're working on that to help there. So I think, and then again, one of the things that certainly we heard from the community, it's a big issue, and one of the things we would be funding with Measure G would be more funding to address these homeless situations. But at the end of the day, we have to be able to find assistance for these folks.
Thank you. That's the last question from the community. Thank you so much.
We've come to the end of our night. We want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time. Hopefully you watched and you learned. Not everybody's going to be happy with what was said. Eracism has been gathering for years, as you've heard, meeting with the city manager. Every life lost in this city has great value, great import. Every life in this city and every mother and father that is crying. We recognize that, and we are clear that pages need to be turned. We congratulate the chief, the city manager, on doing incredibly difficult work, as you can hear, under difficult odds. We believe that the vast majority of people that work in this city, live in this city, are good people. We believe that to paint everybody with a broad brush is a mistake. That not all white people are racist. That not all black people are criminals. That not all police officers are killers. We need to have a clear and nuanced conversation about the real problems in our cities and how we can address those problems in realistic ways, how we can walk together to make our city better. Our children deserve better. And so I'm looking forward to our next conversation with the president of our school board. As we have the hiring of a new superintendent on the verge, how will our school system and our city work together? How can we turn the page from policing to building community to intervention? These are real questions that deserve real answers. It's one thing for us to throw hate bombs at each other. It's another thing for us as Americans, as citizens of this city to listen to each other. No one that I've ever talked to condones loss of life. But what do we do now? That's the conversation before us. We hope that you have learned something tonight. We hope you've learned something you didn't know before. We hope as you watch forums in the future that you can hear from candidates where their vision for this city and how exactly they plan to carry it out. Taglines are good, but when you're looking at the reality of the numbers, what can you do? I want to thank so deeply our police chief for being here tonight. I want to thank our city manager, and I want to thank the organizers of Eracism who spent countless hours engaged in critical conversations around how we can better our city, who spend countless hours listening to members of our communities, educators, community activists, nonprofit organizers. We're hopeful that we can all move this city forward in a way that works for everyone, that there's not another crying mother and father, that women can feel safe walking our streets, that our seniors can feel safe going back and forth to the grocery store, that our children can have access to quality youth employment and education. I'm thankful to you for taking the time, even if you had criticisms to offer. Let's be constructive and move our city forward. Pastor Rodney Leggett will close us out tonight in prayer. Thank you for being with us, Pastor Leggett.
God our Father, we are grateful for the opportunity to inform and inspire, equip and empower our community to move forward on this long journey. We know it's not going to be easy, but we're committed to making a difference where we live, work, and worship. So guide our steps and help us, God, to make a difference, to stand, to speak truth to power, to turn things around, and give this city the hope and the inspiration it needs to truly become a city of God. So we thank you for the willingness of those who will come and sit and answer the questions. And we are committed to continuing bringing the relevant information to those who need it to make the right decisions. And we pray that you give us the strength to do it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.